And again, it's something that if you talk to any person, like work groups like Youth on Fire, which is now under AIDS Action, you talk to any of them, they will clearly confirm this with you, that this is a significant issue and problem. And again, not something that can be solved by a traditional shelter system, not even necessarily going to be solved by traditional permanent supportive housing. There really needs to, a new model needs to emerge of some kind of low threshold housing that provides, I think, the appropriate structure for persons to live successful tenancies, and oftentimes to just transition on to full independence and self-sufficiency.
And when you this concept of low threshold housing, what specifically does that mean?
Well, the low threshold means that and it can only be understood in contrast to a compliance-based model, is that as opposed to there being all of these different rules and the like about you have to do this, this, and this in order to stay here, and that your housing is tied to it. The low threshold model says, no, the only requirements are those expected of any good tenant. You know, you pay your rent on time, you don't destroy your apartment, and you don't do things to really disturb your neighbors and things like this. And then you also don't base it on clinical outcomes. That, in other words, that, you know, you have to see your case manager so many times a week, or you have to be on this medication or that medication, or if you're using and you pick up or whatever, and there's an incident with that, that your housing's not tied to that. There's just as much service and there's just as much intervention, but it doesn't tie the housing to it.
And that seems like a hard sell in the environment, in the current environment we live with politicians.
It's the hardest to sell, though. It's so funny. Is like the hardest group when we first introduced this concept through our Home and Healthy for Good program. The toughest group were staff. That's the group that has the hardest time to deal with it. But then once they do begin to experience it, and they say, hey, you know, that guy who picked up and drank after he'd been off for a while in the past, we used to put him out, we'd never see him again. Now we get to work with him and say, hey, what happened? You know, what led to this? And we can stay connected with him. I can't tell you, when I ran Father Bill's, the frustration I'd have. I'd bring a guy out of the weeds, you know, and would bring him to detox, and he'd come back and be held in the shelter, and I'd get him into a recovery home. The guy picks up one drink, you're out. And
you're out of Father Bill's.
You're out of the recovery home program.
Yeah.
And so where do you think that guy wound up? He would wind up right back in the weeds. And and again, don't get me wrong.
And if I can interrupt, all this work you had done was, you know, it's almost for nothing.
And the guy experienced despair and hopelessness. And again, don't get me wrong, there's a need for sober-based recovery components, because one of the parts of low-threshold housing is the minute a tenant says, I need a safer spot, we kind of have a moral obligation to get them into that safer spot. So I'm not denigrating those programs. They're all important. But when it comes to homelessness, there's got to be a better alternative than the shelter system to meet the needs of these persons.
So, okay. Have you had any real success stories? I mean, are there any programs going on right now where you have these low threshold environments and people are improving, and you have a metric system to show that?
Yeah. In fact, the metric system was actually so solid that the Commonwealth chose it for its first social impact bond, or pay for success component. But what we've been able to do is we've housed through our Home and Healthy for Good program, this is where I get my number phobia comes in, but over 700 people. We have an 85% retention rate, but we've also been able to do cost benefit data, which shows significant reductions in Medicaid costs. With the first cohort that went through of 110, their pre-housing and post-housing Medicaid costs dropped by 65%. And we've also included, just recently, we started our first LGBTQ HHG, and we've already, again, we're about the same. It's an 85% retention rate, but also, again, significant drops in utilization of emergency rooms, of acute hospital care, and most importantly, of shelter stays. So,
and that's a good way to sell these programs.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
not only are you doing
Right.
good, but you're saving society a lot of money.
Right, and wouldn't it be great if we could just rely on moral arguments, particularly at the legislative level, but today you can't. You know, it really has to focus on the investment and the return on that investment. And I think anything that saves costs, specifically with Medicaid, is very powerful.
Well, that's good. That's great.
Yeah.
And do you have any numbers on chronic homelessness?
I do, here in Massachusetts, and one of the things I can say, and I can say it safely because I've said it everywhere, you know, anyway, is that we do not have good metrics at the state level right now around homelessness in Massachusetts, because we rely predominantly on the one-night census, of point-in-time counts. And, you know, that point-in-time count most recently put the chronic homeless number around 1,600 people on unaccompanied adults on any given night. We suspect that probably the number's around 2,000. No, not much higher than that.
Throughout Massachusetts
Throughout
or
Massachusetts. Throughout Massachusetts, but with the majority of, you know, close to 70% probably here in the greater Boston area. So
well, I wish you luck. If somebody's listening to this program and wants to know more about your organization, what can they do?
Well, they can, our website is www.mhsa.net, and our phone number is 617-367-6447.
And we got the website up on the screen, but the phone number is again
617-367-6447.
Because I imagine you could always use volunteers, or if people want to donate.
Well, the other thing we can do is we can coordinate some volunteer opportunities with our various members, and we can use volunteers, but it's usually a little different because we're coming at it from the policy side, and we look for volunteers that are into data and into, you know,
crunching numbers,
putting some numbers right, different things.
Which I find fascinating, given that you're dealing with a social welfare program. Because you know, I've had some experience in dealing with these things, and it's very hard to put numbers on these things.
It is.
So it's just great that you're able to do that. And just for my own, when you say members, what do you mean by members?
Well, again, we have agencies, homeless organizations, all, you know, shelters, day program, whatever, but they're nonprofit agencies who are members of the Massachusetts Housing and Shelter Alliance. But again, not as a trade association, in that we don't exist for their institutional well-being. They're joining us is a sign that, you know, they believe, as we do, that we could be doing something better to end homelessness as we currently experience it. And,
well, it sounds like you're making very good progress.
well, I think we are. Again, particularly now with this Pay for Success, which is plans to add 500 placements in the next 2 years. We're up to 111 as of today.
Wow.
And it's unique in the sense that it's partially funded through private investment, which is going to be interesting to see how that works out. But the really significant thing of it is as well, too, is that the programs who participate receive Medicaid reimbursement for the tenant-based services and the low-threshold services that are being provided, which is pretty exciting.
Because they're saving money on the other end.
That's what we hope, yeah. And we're, of course, doing some work now to try to really do a far more intensive cost benefit with, you know, some type of, I guess the word is propensity scoring, but with some type of control set up that we can take a look to see how significant these numbers are.
And we're about out of time, but I just want to finish off with, I mean, we're heading into the holiday season, and we're heading into the cold months. Are there any special issues you face?
Well, I think right now, particularly here in Boston, there's an issue that we are starting to see an overflow emerge again in terms of numbers at the front door. And I think part of that is that the capacity, as we don't house people, because that's dropped off a little bit in terms of housing resources, and as the market has tightened so much here in Boston, that we are starting to see those numbers grow. So I think particularly for here in Boston, some of the larger programs that are out there, you know, whether it's Pine Street or Boston Public Health, any type of assistance you can provide them during this time of year is critical, whether you're talking about clothing or socks, and which again is absolutely critical for the homeless, or the socks is instrumental. And but I think that if you contact those particular programs too, they can better inform you of exactly what they need or what they're looking for.
And these programs are, again?
Groups like Pine Street Inn, Boston Public Health, St. Francis House, a great organization, also Boston Healthcare for the Homeless, which is a fantastic group as well.
And then you mentioned Father Bill's, of course, in
Well, yeah,
Quincy,
we can't
which I
leave
know
out,
is great.
yeah, well, they would not be happy with me if I excluded them as well. But
I lived in Quincy since '91. I've heard of Father Bill's before I moved to Quincy, and their reputation is quite stellar.
well, you know, it's something that I can share with you, particularly around the LGBTQ issues, is that in the 90s, we were one of the few shelters in the entire greater Boston area that would even accept a transgender person, believe it or not. And it was
And that's during the '90s.
That
speaks volumes for Father Bill's.
Yeah, so it was, and again, it was all, again, based on the spirit of the place, which was never to turn anybody away, you know, quite honestly. But we actually educated the staff at that particular point in time. We brought in, I will never forget, because it was the Justice Resource Institute that came in, and we did staff training and made everybody aware and sensitive of what those issues were.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming in.
Tim,
Thank you.
It was great. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you on the third Wednesday of every month, live at 4 p.m. I am Tim Lynch. I'm your host of Legal Lines, brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. Have a good day and happy Thanksgiving.